Greetings, YouTube. Privilege doesn't mean you don't suffer. I'm going to be linking to an article, rather a discussion on Metafilter. I'm not linking directly to the article itself. It has an annoying auto-roll ad, so you can go there if you'd like. And I'm also going to be linking to an article by a piece written by a guy named Arthur Chu, and I'm going to be reading an excerpt from that in a minute. But what I mean by privilege doesn't mean you don't suffer. I'm going to use an example, and that example is me. I was raised in an abusive household and raised by a drunk. And that led to physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, until I couldn't show emotions properly, until I was hypervigilant at all times, until I was riddled with self-loathing. And that didn't go away as I got older. Even after my father moved out at 14, the patterns had been set. Even though the immediate danger was gone, the patterns had been established, and my suffering continued, even though it was I imposing it upon myself. But even in that state of mind, in that horrible position I was in, there were lots of things in the world I never ever had to worry about. I didn't have to worry about being stopped by the police just because I was walking in a neighborhood that I didn't live in. I didn't have to worry about the possibility that I would be arrested just because of my skin color. If I had a BB gun in my hand, which I often did, I was not concerned for a heartbeat that I would be shot by the police. It never even occurred to me. And that is the definition of privilege. There were all kinds of things I never ever had to think about, never had to worry about. As a young male, I walked down the streets at night and never, for a second, feared for my well-being. Was never concerned that I was going to be verbally harassed or groped in public, because that was my male privilege. I can remember having Hispanic and black adult men deferring to me because I was white, and being mystified when it happened, and only in retrospect did I figure out why. Of being in conversations that I can look back in the past and realize that I was listened to while someone else wasn't, because I was a man. Watching a woman be ignored or dismissed. So my privilege is real, and it is something I have to face, and I have to process, and I have to rid myself of if I can. Be aware of it. And, if I can, use it to my advantage. Because there are times when I'll be listened to when somebody else won't. And I hope maybe I can get a message through to people. Now, I was an awkward, nerdy guy at different points in my life. Oh, I still am, but there was a section of my life where my awkward, nerdy bits kept me from establishing the kinds of relationships I wanted. Though, oddly, amongst my group of awkward, nerdy men, I actually dated more than a lot of them, which mystified me to no end. I'll have to show you pictures of me in my youth someday. The fact that I got dates is kind of stunning, but I did. But there were still things I didn't have to worry about, didn't have to be concerned with, and I'm going to read that passage to you. And this comes from the Arthur Chu piece. Here it is. This is comparing two different people. A guy named Scott's experience and a woman's named Amy's experience. Okay, and how they compare to each other and how they differ. To be blunt, Scott's story is about Scott himself spending a lot of time by himself, hating himself. Yeah, I know what that's like. When he eventually stops hating himself, and as an older, more mature nerd asks women out, no woman mace him, slap him, or ritually humiliate him. All things that apparently a lot of men some who aren't even misogynists, fear. Instead, he ends up with a girlfriend who ends up becoming a wife. So far, so typical. Amy's story is about being harassed and groped by men in the tech world, and eventually being raped by a shy, nerdy guy she thought she trusted. So far, so also typical. What's the biggest difference between Scott and Amy's stories? Scott's story is about things that happened inside his brain. Amy's story is about actual things that are done to her by other people against her will, without her control. And Scott and his commenters are treating the two as worthy of equivalent degrees of scrutiny. And there's one of the big problems I have with a lot of the MRA community and their constant statements of how men have it so bad. And the idea that men denied dating and things are somehow suffering. When a lot of the problems that we have had in our lives when it came to an inability to interact with people properly and in the romantic world is all inside our heads. We do these things to ourselves. And when we stop doing them to ourselves and we become more mature, more capable adults, suddenly relationships are available. Why? Because we're not doing the things that we used to do. We aren't living that self-loathing cycle, a feedback loop of loathing and anxiety and depression that keeps us from having healthy relationships. I speak from experience. On the plus side, no matter how bad off I was, I kept trying to have relationships. But because of my own issues, none of them lasted very long and none of them was all that healthy. Because I was in my own way. Now I'm not. But all of that I went through, as unpleasant as it was, is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket of human suffering compared to what happens to women like Amy. Being harassed and assaulted and raped. And then having people say that the self-loathing inside my head and in the heads of many men is somehow equivalent to the horrible things that happen to women out in the real world. And they aren't. And those men don't have to worry about those things. And that is privilege. And for the commenters who are going to write below and say how men are raped and how men are assaulted more than women, I want you to look at the statistics and tell me who rapes the men and who assaults the men. And then take a deep breath and ask yourself, why are men violent? I'm not saying women aren't violent. They can be quite violent. I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. But all the men being attacked and murdered, for the most part, are being attacked and murdered by men. And the men being raped are, by the most part, being raped by other men. Of course, you look at the statistics, who's raping and abusing and harassing and assaulting and murdering women, of course, it's also men. But the MRAs and misogynists don't want to face that reality. They want to downplay it. And I won't. Their ability to downplay that is also